Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to move the motion on the establishment of an ad hoc committee to investigate the maize situation in the country. Whereas maize is Kenya's staple food, whose demand and supply is monitored by the government through the strategic grain reserves, and whereas that Kenya has been experiencing maize shortage mainly due to the high cost of production, the effects of climate change, and poor management of the strategic grain reserves, noting that maize farmers have called to question the efficiency and capacity of the National Cereals and Produce Board, which is the institution mandated to buy maize from farmers to continuously replenish the strategic reserves, to effectively handle and manage maize produce, forcing small-scale farmers to sell their produce to unscrupulous traders at very low prices, cognizant that the National Cereals and Produce Board has on many occasions declined to buy maize from farmers, claiming that its stores are full to capacity, and failed to pay the farmers whose produce it has received, thereby exposing them to severe financial problems. Concerned that although the government has committed to supporting maize farming in Kenya in order to ensure Kenya's food security, little has been done to improve the efficiency of the National Cereals and Produce Board and protect the farmers from exploitation. Aware that the government, during periods of maize shortage, grants waivers to enable importation of maize duty-free, concerned that the last duty-free window, which was scheduled to terminate in October 2017, was not terminated, and that deliveries continued until late December 2017, leading to overstocking of most of the National Cereals Board stores, with no clarity as to where the maize deliveries actually came from. Concerned that failure to properly manage the maize situation in Kenya would lead to disillusionment of farmers, famine, civil strife, and in fact economic sabotage. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves to establish an ad hoc committee to inquire into the maize crisis in the country and report to the Senate within 60 days after the adoption of this motion on the following. 1, why farmers who have delivered their produce to the National Cereals Produce Board have not been paid to date. 2, the quantity of duty-free maize imported into the country during the duty-free window, which was to end in October 2017, and why the period was actually extended. 3, the challenges facing the maize farmers and the NCPB, and make recommendations on how to resolve the challenges. 4, the maize received by the NCPB for the period 2017-2018 season, to establish the supplies. And 4 and 5, the criteria for identification of millers and business persons involved in the importation of maize to the country. And further, that the following senators be members of the ad hoc committee. 1, Professor Margaret Kamar. 2, Moses Wetangula, who is also a co-sponsor of this motion. 3, Samson Cherargei, Senator Nandi. 4, Senator Petronila Were Locorio. 5, Senator Christopher Langat. 6, Senator Michael Bito, Senator of Trans Nzoia. And 7, Senator Boniface Kabaka. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issue of maize in this country is becoming a very touchy issue. And in this motion, we are requesting for the establishment of an ad hoc committee to investigate the whole system of this maize crisis. And Mr. Speaker, one may ask, why are we going this route? Mr. Speaker, 2 months ago, on the 29th of May, 2018, I made a statement regarding the situation of maize, particularly in Uasin Gishu County, and outlined the fact that farmers were not paid. And thereafter, Mr. Speaker, we discovered actually from the report of the minister that it is true farmers were not paid, and there was suspicion that traders were paid. Mr. Speaker, my appeal for an ad hoc committee is the fact that there are things that are known to the minister that are not known to the farmers, and nobody is giving us that information. Mr. Speaker, it is true that farmers delivered their grains from December last year, 2017, and that most of the farmers have not been paid to date. Mr. Speaker, early July, there is a letter, a communication, which we could table here also, that was a communication from the EACC to the Minister of Agriculture. It was dated 2nd of July, suspending the payment of farmers officially. And again, this was not known to the farmers, that actually an official suspension was initiated by EACC. And the suspension, according to EACC, was pending investigations on who the real farmers are and who they are not. And yet, in this House, we have had the privilege of seeing a report that came from the same minister that he has now known who actually delivered and who did not deliver. Mr. Speaker, the pain of the farmer is what is disturbing those of us who are from maize-growing areas. Beginning from the fact that these are people, farmers, who are not able to pay school fees for their children. Some of them, actually, their children have lost admissions to universities. I have witnessed some of them in tears that they have 3 million with the National Cereals Board, and yet they cannot pay 200,000 to a university. Mr. Speaker, it is a very painful situation when you listen to a farmer declare that they will never plant maize again. Only on Monday, 2 days ago, Mr. Speaker, farmers had another meeting in Uasin Gishu. And during the meeting, they are still pleading for intervention that they may be paid for what is due to them. If it is true, Mr. Speaker, as the minister confessed, that actually the ministry paid for paid traders and not farmers, what is extremely difficult with paying the farmers so that the minister sorts out the people that were paid by the National Cereals and the National Cereals Produce Board? Because it is very clear that these facts are there. So when we are told that there is a clear suspension from the EACC, you question whether there is no deliberate plan to frustrate these farmers from planting maize. And yet we are all aware, Mr. Speaker, that maize is a staple food in this country and that we cannot do without it. We have listened to consumers of maize even demand for the price to go down. Why? Because this is a crop that we cannot do without. Mr. Speaker, it is extremely painful to observe what these farmers are going through. Planting of maize, Mr. Speaker, for the information of the House, has dropped to about 50% because people could not afford to plant. We had very good rains, so those who planted may get a good crop. But you ask yourself, Mr. Speaker, internationally, what do countries do with the crops that produce the food for their people? Not to mention the fact that in the big four that we have as a government currently, one of them is food security. How can we be talking of food security if the staple food of the nation is threatened the way it is being threatened? Mr. Speaker, it is very important that we now go deeply and look at this. And the reason, therefore, that we felt with my co-sponsor that we must bring it to the seat of Senate is the fact that agriculture is devolved. Except for policy in agriculture and policy in veterinary services, actually agriculture is 100% devolved. We know the National Assembly made an attempt, the committee of the National Assembly went round, came back, and everything has gone down. The farmers are not paid, deliveries have not been done. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that actually 50% of the deliveries have just been done. We know there are complicated issues, and that's why it is necessary to investigate to the depth, Mr. Speaker. We know there are other issues that come with whether the customs union in the East African community can disallow movement of maize from Uganda to Kenya or movement of maize from Tanzania to Kenya. We need to be looking at that. But while that is so, the question that still arises is, when the National Cereals and Produce Board put a price of 3,200 per bag, was that for the farmer or for the trader who goes to buy produce in Kampala? Was that for the Kenyan farmer, or it was meant for the farmer who goes to Dar es Salaam to collect maize? Mr. Speaker, these are things that we feel require a lot of attention so that we can come up with policies in future that may save this country from embarrassment. Mr. Speaker, it is true that farmers have made their plea to various officers in this land, and they are feeling completely helpless and frustrated. Liberalization of maize is something that may not be avoided. But the biggest question is, what do we do with our farmers? Mr. Speaker, we know that the UK is one country that we adopted a lot of things from. To date, they subsidize their farmers and they protect their staple foods. The same thing to the US, the same thing to most of the countries in the EU. I know we have raised the issues of if we have to get food security, what are the main drivers towards food security? Mr. Speaker, for us to be able to deal with the issue of food security, I dare say now that unless we take care of our farmers properly, we will not get anything. It is very easy to assume that these farmers are getting subsidies. After all, they were given fertilizer, free fertilizer. If these farmers were cutting anything that is profitable, we should see them. We should see that in the way they will have grown and the way they live. Mr. Speaker, days are gone when farmers were rich people. There were times in this country when we had something called the minimum guaranteed returns. The Honorable Senator Ongeri knows that, because it was in these days that Parliament said, if for any reason you lose a crop because of drought, if for any reason you lose a crop because of flooding, there is a guaranteed minimum return that the government must pay for you. This was wiped when we are told everything is liberal. During the structural adjustment period in this country, a lot of things were changed. But at that time, you could see a farmer behaving like somebody who has income. But now we are talking of farmers who have no minimum return. They farm at their own risk to ensure that Kenyans feed. They farm at their own risk to ensure that we have food security. The biggest question now is, if truly we want to ensure that there is food security, unless there is minimum guaranteed returns, there is no way that anybody will want to risk. It is no wonder we are seeing coffee arriving in Uasin Gishu and Trans Nzoia. We are seeing sugarcane arriving in Trans Nzoia, in Uasin Gishu and Trans Nzoia. We are seeing avocados coming to Uasin Gishu and Trans Nzoia. So where is the future of the food security of this country? Unless as leaders we sit in a sober way and discuss how we'll ensure that there is food security, it is going to be extremely difficult for us to ensure that. Mr. Speaker, currently, the farmers are also supported through a fund under AFC as a loan. The shocking thing, Mr. Speaker, is that those who took loans from AFC in the year 2017 and have not delivered their crop, the clock is ticking as far as the loan is concerned. The interests are going higher. The interest is increasing. Nobody is stopping. And yet, for the farmers who have not been paid by government, nobody is saying that the loan you took will be paid, the interest will be paid for you because your money is with the cereals board. The money that is in the cereals board, when a few farmers were paid in January, they were paid exactly what for what they delivered, meaning that the farmers are going to make losses both through the money that has not accrued any interest, and at the same time, they will be paying AFC. I think it is very important that we do a thorough job as the Senate, because agriculture is devolved anyway. It is good that we do a thorough job, investigate properly, and once we have done that investigation, Mr. Speaker, we should be able to come up with resolutions as outlined here in the motion, Mr. Speaker. We need to come up with resolutions that will enhance not only the farming for purposes of food security, but it should also not take us there again. We should be able to come out of it once and for all, so that our farmers do not lose hope and get discouraged and change their crops and destroy the crop that has been stabilizing the food in this country. Mr. Speaker, the challenges facing the farmer in Kenya are both at the production stage, the management stage, and at the selling stage. The challenges are many. Mr. Speaker, I beg that this House supports this motion so that the ad hoc committee can go and thoroughly investigate and actually come up with resolutions that will help us as a House to take charge of the agriculture sector. Because as farmers are feeling that we have left them alone, I do agree that this House should have taken a greater role than, in fact, the National Assembly. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to ask Senator Morgomen to second.